Okay, so one thing is we focus on what I'll call a sound or an image. And then I think more on the political justice level, we also have an instinct for compassion oftentimes, but in a highly limited frame. So because you have a sound or an image, and an instinct for compassion comes up, instinct for compassion actually doesn't try to see things in over time, how things got this way and where things are headed. We don't want to see them in depth. We don't want to see them in complexity. We oftentimes frame the world based, again, on what will create the most ego stability. And by ego stability means the way that you see the world that wants to continue into the future. There's no growth, there's no depth, there's no deeper understanding of oneself or another person. So we typically frame the world, and I'm talking the compassion instinct, by an already preset position. And as I said last week, and I can talk about this more today if people want, people think that justice and compassion are more or less cover the same territory. I remember, I think I've shared this with you when I tried to engage in a discussion about justice with a colleague of mine. And my colleague became impatient with my approach that I learned in university when I was working on a doctorate in social ethics. Therefore, I had to do a lot of training in natural law theory and moral philosophy. So when something says something is unjust, what kicks in for me is a rather complex, detailed set of steps and tools to figure out what that means. So my colleague became a little bit impatient with me and says, I'll tell you what justice is. Someone is hurting, someone's wounded, and I take care of that. That's justice. And I thought to myself, well, that's compassion. That's not justice. I mean, say, for example, someone said to me, a person's locked up all alone underground. What do? Locked up all alone underground. Let's free that person. Oh, did I mention that it's a mass murderer sitting in solitary confinement because every time you let them out, they claw at somebody? Oh, I forgot to mention that part, right? So sometimes you just see a fact. Here's the fact. Here's the soundbite. Here's the image. And the person says, well, I have compassion. Here's what we do. They don't want to stand back and say, well, what is the larger context of this? Because the instant compassion typically somehow feeds one's own issues or somehow feeds a larger worldview. So another thing that I think happens in the world and happens within each of us, we either have compassion for ourselves, we feel sorry for ourselves, we feel ourselves to be a victim, or we feel sorry for someone else who is a victim because we have compassion in what I call a limited frame, la brute. Or we say emes, actually, when someone, emes. If someone sneezes, it means what the speaker has said is the absolute truth. That's the supernatural affirmation commentary from the divine. Okay, so we first of all have the sound bite or the image, again, that consciousness latches onto. And sometimes they're fed to us, and we fall prey to the manipulations of others who only produce for us sound bites and images that they know will inspire what I'll call a limited frame of compassion without the complexity of before, after, how it got that way, ramifications. And then I think the third part of it is, what happens with everybody is we experience what is called righteous indignation. And you've heard me say before, I think righteous indignation on a spiritual level, oftentimes that word phrase is redundant. It's the rare person who says, I'm indignant, but I have no right to be. Okay, most of the time, indignant comes fueled with self-righteousness. So when you get to that point, when you're already either in an interpersonal conflict or a political conflict, there's almost no room for discussion. And that's why I think it is so hard to talk about things when people finally get to the point of righteous indignation, because they have the sound, they have the image, they're filled with compassion. So compassion already makes you a morally better person. And anybody who doesn't have compassion like you is a morally worse person. And therefore the righteous indignation becomes, in a way, a conflict between good and evil. I have good, you have evil. Now I've experienced this week because I was asked a question in shul last week, and I answered in a fluent, decisive manner, and maybe I should have shown more nuance, but I've had the question posed to me a few more times in the past week. The question is, to hit, cut right to the chase here is, don't I feel compassion for the 9 Turks that were killed on the flotilla? And my answer was, I had to think, maybe somewhere, I'm not in touch with it, so let me go way, way, way down. And, I got to about maybe 30 feelings, and wherever it was after that, right? So, and I had people say to me, well, don't you feel compassion for them? I said, if you've ever been beat up, if you ever been assaulted by people, and you managed to fight your way out, and you fought your way out by hurting those people, the first thought in my mind was not, I feel so badly for them. Right? It's just, if you've ever been assaulted, I have actually been assaulted with poles. I grew up in a rough place, and there were people who used weapons. And I remember I had a few friends, and we fought back, and we got out of there, I'm glad to say. As we left, as we ran from the scene before more of their help, I didn't think to myself, I feel so sorry for them. I thought to myself, A, I'm glad to be alive. B, I'm glad we won. And third, they got what they deserved. Okay? So I didn't feel sorry. So when I think about and again, the more that I know about what happened, meaning that this whole thing seems to have been constructed by Turkish intelligence services, and the guys on the boats were mercenaries and hooligans and jihadis, people who wanted to die for the cause. They had, if you saw the other image of them, mercilessly beating the Israeli soldiers, I looked at that and I saw them, swinging the poles and, with the knives. And I thought to myself, how could a person like that say, I feel compassion for those people? They were murderous thugs.